Potter, co-founder and president of Yoga Buzz here in St. Louis, and I have scheduled all of these fantastic conversations with different people across the country who are integrating yoga into really new and unique ways. And I have Hala Khouri here, who is a somatic counselor and a yoga teacher, and is also one of the co-founders of Off the Mat Into the World. And that's actually where I met her at a training a couple months ago. So hello, Hala.
Hello, it's so nice to be here.
Yeah, thank you. So tell us about your background, both in yoga and in counseling.
So I've been teaching yoga for about 15 years, and prior to teaching yoga, I taught fitness for 10 years. So I've been teaching movement forever. And in about 2004, I got my counseling degree. I got a master's in counseling psychology, and right when I finished my master's degree, I got trained in a technique called somatic experiencing, which is a body-based psychotherapy that addresses how trauma lives in the body. So I've been in private practice doing somatic experiencing, fusing it with yoga sometimes for about 10 years now.
Cool. Sweet. And so tell me what your practice looks like now, your practice specifically with somatic therapy.
Mm-hmm. It really depends on the person. In a typical somatic experiencing session, there's a lot of inviting people to tune into sensations, being aware of what's happening in their body. I'm tracking their bodies. I'm not just tracking their words. Mm-hmm. Sometimes there's movement. Sometimes I'll have people move their bodies in a particular way. I don't do a lot of yoga in session with clients unless it's necessary. So, for example, I do have one or two clients that just sitting and being with sensations a little too much. Mm-hmm. So we get up and we move and we breathe. Mm-hmm. I do recommend yoga to a lot of clients, and so they'll go use the tools they get in the sessions with me in the yoga. Cool. And they'll also gather information in the yoga practice to bring back into sessions with me, so they feed off each other.
Awesome. And yeah. What are some of the benefits that you see of integrating the somatic experiencing with yoga as well as two separate things?
Yeah. So I think that some people can take all of their bad habits and just do them in yoga. Yeah. So whether they're being overly critical or they're working too hard or they're underworking, mm-hmm. you can do the same thing in a yoga class. And if you don't have a teacher that can sort of catch that and invite you to shift it, it can also be perpetuated. Mm-hmm. I remember having a client who dealt with really chronic digestive issues and a lot of stress. And I said to her, you should probably do yoga. She said, I do yoga 3 days a week. And I said, well, what's your yoga class like? She said, the teacher's really mean, and it's really hard. So whether the teacher was actually mean or that was her projection, right. She was recreating the stressful experience even in her yoga. So bringing the somatic awareness, the awareness of what self-regulation means, of how trauma impacts us, to yoga can help flip the yoga and make it even more healing. Yeah. And then, of course, using the yoga to help people feel more connected to their bodies can facilitate a somatic therapy session because they're in practice of tuning to their sensations.
Yeah. What do you think the benefits are, or the difference in benefits are between the cognitive behavioral therapy, where it's talk therapy, versus the somatic-based practices?
Mm-hmm. I think that talk therapy can be incredibly helpful because being able to name what we're going through and be witness can be really healing. For many people, there's a limit to how beneficial it can be because until the rest of us is kind of enrolled in what we've realized, it's really hard to change our patterns. I often ask people, how many of us have been in a lot of therapy, and I could write novels about my issues, but they're not necessarily changing. Yeah. So I think that talking is really important, and teaching people that I think this is a 12-step saying that the issues live in the tissues, right? That until we're really shifting how we're wired, sometimes the awareness can make it worse because then you're doing your same behavior and you know you shouldn't be doing it. So we want to connect the two. I love educating people and letting them see that their stress is living in their bodies, and that often the behaviors that cause us the most suffering bubble up as impulses in our bodies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
What advice do you have to others who are looking to integrate yoga into their own trauma recovery? So somebody who specifically is healing from trauma and is interested in doing a body-based practice like yoga?
Of course, the best is to find a teacher that has some training in trauma-informed yoga. That's not always easy. There are online resources, online yoga classes, online classes that are trauma-informed. Although that can also not be easy if you don't want to practice alone. Sure. So, go try to find a class where you feel that the instructor is experienced and compassionate, and willing to really invite you to honor your body. So, if you go to a class and you feel like there isn't permission to take a break, or there's pressure to do it a certain way, that might not be the best setting. Although for some people, being in a class where there's a lot of structure can actually be containing. Sure. Right? So what I would say is notice how you feel after. Ask yourself, is the practice... it's not always enjoyable. Sometimes you go and you actually hate it because it's hard to be in our bodies. So what I would say is, do you feel that the teacher is holding a nurturing space? And are you feeling like you can move towards things that are uncomfortable without being overwhelmed? Because yoga can be really uncomfortable. And maybe get some information on what a trauma-informed practice looks like. And that might be, depending on who's in your area, something you do online. And maybe we can share some resources for that. I know I've got some videos online, and others might. And that way all right, it's important for me to be attuning to my sensations and into my breath and not feel pressure to make the pose look a certain way. Sure. Yeah.
What advice would you have for a yoga teacher who's interested in bringing more awareness, not necessarily, aside from specific training, but just wanting to be a little bit more conscious of their students who might be healing from trauma?
Yeah. I try to tell teachers to think about that everything that they see in their students is possibly a result of stress or trauma. So if we see students that, say, are spacing out, instead of deciding that they're trying to be mean to us or they're bored with us, maybe that's all their nervous system can handle and they need to just zone out. So if we just cultivate a lens of really deep compassion, that everybody's doing the best they can given the load that they're bearing, that to me is the cornerstone of a trauma-informed perspective. So I would say to do that as a teacher. And if it's not about going to get trainings, is reading books. I'm really loving Bessel van der Kolk's latest book, The Body Keeps the Score. Yeah. He has a whole chapter on trauma in there. And really I think that being trauma-informed is in many ways an attitude of seeing that we're shaped by our life experiences and that the behaviors we see on the yoga mat are just a result of that. And how do we hold that in a really sacred, compassionate way?
Any other advice that you have? What about advice? Because there's a number of social workers in the St. Louis area who are really interested in integrating yoga into what it is that they're offering. Any advice for that particular perspective?
Yeah, I love working with social workers, and I get a lot of them in my workshops too. So cultivate your own practice, because when we have an embodied experience of knowing what it's doing for us, then we can articulate and share that with others. And of course, all the education pieces are similar ones, right? Some of the trainings that are out there aren't just for yoga teachers. They really are for direct service providers that just want to offer those tools. And it can be as simple as teaching your clients breath work or a little bit of movement, right? You don't have to have a whole yoga training to do that. So I would say pick the few things that work for you and think about how you might want to share those with your clients.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Sweet. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing your radiant knowledge.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And thank you for getting this information out to your community. It's really important.